Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to a new edition of our Unity Hawza Year 1. And we are in our second Hawza this year. And of course, we follow the footsteps of our dear Imam Seyyed Mehdi Razvi, who we were fortunate to do Ziyarat yesterday with my lovely wife. We went to the Islamic, there's actually an Iranian Islamic graveyard in Hamburg, which is quite a special thing in Germany, I would even say in Europe. And so we were able to go and make Ziyarat. For those who don't know, Ziyarat means to visit one of the graves, mashallah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel. So Ziyarat means to visit the tombs of those great Muslim saints and walis, awliyatullah, and mystical personalities who have passed and who have, who have a grave that can be identified. Yeah, pretty much everything that scares Wahhabis. Yeah, but it's interesting thing, when I started Islam, I was a Sunni Muslim for a long time. I was a Sunni Muslim maybe 10, 12 years. And I actually was introduced. This is not to scare you all, but I was my prayer was taught to me by a Wahhabi. But I always knew that Wahhabi Islam was nothing for me because they forbid absolutely everything that was beautiful about Islam. Yeah, they simply forbid everything, whether it was the music or whether it was how to read the Quran or visiting the graves and doing the ziyarat, and anything spiritual was just completely forbidden. And yeah, exactly. So much beauty lost. So at the end of the day, I knew very quickly that Wahhabi Islam was nothing for me. But nevertheless, I did learn from a Wahhabi my prayer, and I pretty quickly switched to Hanafi Sufi Islam, which is especially the Turkish version is very much based on Sufism and a kind of a Sharia oriented Sufism, kind of dry and not very, let's say, colorful, a little bit, stay on your course and stay on the line, and a somewhat militaristic almost Sufism, but nonetheless a very powerful and mystical Sufism in its own way. But after really a lot of research, and they also do ziyarat to be honest, they also do ziyarat in Hanafi Sufi Islam. So it's not only the Shia who are doing ziyarat, it's also the Sufis who are doing ziyarat. And what they do is they go and visit, they try to visit the living sheikhs as much as they can, and they also they do allow almost I would say 95% of the orders of Sufism, the tariqah or the turuq in plural, they allow the visits to the graves of those who have passed in Islam. And that's something we call, ziyarat, and visiting and giving dua, making prayers to Allah and asking for the intercession of the particular saint or the wali or somehow even the imam, if it's Shia Islam, one of the 12 imams, alayhum assalam ajma'in, or if it's Zaydi Islam, any of the imams of the Ahlul Bayt, alayhum assalam ajma'in. Yeah, it's definitely huge in 12er Islam. Absolutely, and it is also in Sufism though. So even Hanafi Maliki Sufis are going out there and doing visits to the tombs and getting barakat. Okay, so what does it mean to get barakat? What is barakat or barakah? So barakat is grace. It's Allah's grace upon us. It's the grace of the universe upon us, is how the modern day esotericists would somehow classify it. So how to get the grace of the universe upon us, or how to get Allah's grace upon us to add a layer of consciousness to today's postmodern esotericism, how to get Allah's grace upon us is to give respect to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to give respect to the family of the Prophet Muhammad alayhum assalam ajma'in, to give respect to the prophets, the Nabi'un of Islam, Hazrat Isa, Jesus Christ alayhi salam, Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, Moses, Hazrat Abraham alayhi salam, all the prophets that have gone before us, back to Adam and Eve alayhum assalam ajma'in. You'll notice I dropped Eve in there. Yes, Imam Razvi had a very clear position on this, alayhi salam. He said also there were women prophets in Islam, like Hazrat Hawza, that's Eve alayhi salam in English, Hazrat Maria alayhi salam, and so many of the Hazrat Khadija alayhi salam, who supported the Prophet Muhammad through the first 25 years of Islam, especially in the time when he was constricted to be exiled from Medina and needed support and financial resources, and he got them from his lovely wife Khadija alayhi salam in the most difficult times. Ibn Hazm, yeah, I'm interested to hear about that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Rachel, if you're on it? I'll give you the mic.
Yeah, I can send you a paper on it actually. And I think Ibn Hazm was, I think he was Lahiri, which is quite a literalist school. And his position was that because the Quran mentions the wahi that was given to Maryam alayha salam, that this was, I don't think he specifically categorically said that he absolutely took that position, but he said that position was certainly a possible position to take.
I'm super interested. If you can find a source, I'm super interested to research that. So feel free to give a research. Rabi al-Adawiya, yeah, absolutely lovely lady, absolutely magical, mystical lady. So if you look at the ethos of love in Tasawwuf, how this developed, it's very much Rabi al-Adawiya who started this whole thing about love, yeah, because before Rabi al-Adawiya, there was a large emphasis in Tasawwuf on tazkiyat. Tazkiyat means, it comes from the word zakat, or the same root word as zakat. It's zakaf, ta, and it means to purify, yeah? So like if you're making money and you want to purify your money, then at the end of a given year, if you have reached a certain level of wealth, then you give 1/40th of your wealth back to, you know, certain groups that are mentioned in the Quran, and this is your purification of your wealth, and it's called zakat. That's the reason that one of the 5 pillars of Islam is called zakat, okay? And tazkiyat is the spiritual practice. So in other words, the daily spiritual practice of saying, of doing all your prayers on time, of course, and of you know, maintaining good relationships with your family and your neighbors and your friends and kind of your whole community, and saying salawat and barakat on the Prophet and his family, and basically purifying your soul and staying away from the bad things and going toward the good things. So proclaiming the good and dissuading from the bad. When you start to practice this is called tazkiyat, okay? And this is the purification of the soul. And this was the main focus of tasawwuf for maybe the first 2-3 centuries of Islam, until basically Rabi al-Adawiya came, alayhi salam, and she was really the first one to say, you know, I just reject worldly love because I'm in love with my creator. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And she would say things that, you know, people wouldn't understand. There would be a long line of potential husbands out the door looking to marry her, and she would basically reject them all, saying, I'm already married to the creator subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is how the whole love epos started. And then of course the Persian poets Fariduddin Attar and Rumi and Sa'di really picked up on this and developed it into a whole ethos of love within tasawwuf. Okay, so that's a little just aside on Rabi al-Adawiya alayhi salam. May Allah grant her blessings and blessings and blessings in Jannat. And so going back to Ziyarat, you know, even having been a Sunni Muslim for a long time practicing tasawwuf, you know, I also did Ziyarat, and I was able to go to Konya and visit Maulana Shamsuddin Tabriz, who was the teacher of Maulana Rumi, for those who know about Rumi, the ancient Persian poet. And his teacher was a fellow called Shamsuddin Tabriz. Many of you probably know whom he is. And he was a really mystical guy. And I must have been now in my life maybe, I don't know, 8 or 10 times to Konya, and having visited Shamsuddin Tabriz. And every time it's like you just put your hand on the pedestal in front of the grave, and it's like all this barakat comes, you know, all these stations and kind of mini revelations, if you will. You just get flooded with God's grace, you know, and it's unbelievable experience. I really recommend anyone to go to Konya and visit Rumi and visit Shamsuddin Tabriz and try to get this barakat, because it's an unbelievable experience. And the only thing, again, that is asked is respect. It's not like they're asking you to make sajda, because sajda is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So bowing down is only for for Allah during prayer. Of course, we don't bow down, but we give respect. It's what's called adab. And adab, I'll write this in the chat. Adab is a really important word in Islam, and it means basically virtuous behavior. And it is the center, adab is the center of Islamic spirituality. So you can say that without adab, you can say that adab is the door, okay, to enter Islamic spirituality. If you don't pay respect to the prophets, if you don't pay respect to the family of the prophet, alayhum assalam ajma'in, sallallahu alayhi wasalam, if you don't pay respect to the awliyatullah and all of the greats that have gone before us, why should anyone pay respect to you? Okay, so basically, so that's why the basic rule is adab, or virtuous behavior, and it's the door to Islamic spirituality. So that's why when you do ziyarat, the key to ziyarat is adab, okay, and the key to spirituality in Islam is also adab. So adab is also the key to Islamic, to ziyarat, to the gems of ziyarat, or to the grace of Allah through ziyarat. Okay, so adab, adab, adab. So if I didn't say it before, adab, adab, adab. If I didn't say it before, didn't say it yet, adab. All right, so adab is important. All right, behavior, how to behave, eating with the right hand, taking your shoes before you go in someone's house. When you sit in front of a teacher, don't spread out your legs, keep your legs to yourself. There are some very basic spiritual adab that you learn when you hang out with people from the Middle East, and when you follow tariqah, a spiritual path, for a certain number of years. And Westerners, when they come, they're like, well, why can't I just be comfortable and sit down and spread my legs in front of my teacher? And it's just little things like that that show, are you playing Champions League football, or are you somehow still trying out for the Pee Wee football team? Yeah. So it's kind of like, where are you going to position yourself? Yeah. And if you want to receive the fruits and the grace of barakat, it's really important to work on adab, especially in the Middle East and in the Islamic culture. So, but this is also, as I said, even with the ziyarat, with those spiritual teachers who have passed before us, adab is the key. So that was just a little aside, a venue aside to today's class. And the reason that I started with that is because yesterday we did the ziyarat to my dear teacher, Imam Razvi alayhi salam. And I was able to speak with him and get some barakat from him. My lovely wife had a conversation with him. Subhanahu wa ta'ala was able to give grace through Imam Razvi to us. And it brings us to our next subject, intercession. So intercession, the Wahhabis have completely misunderstood intercession. And they say that even the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ cannot grant intercession, because only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can grant intercession. Of course, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can grant intercession. Of course, only He will take the final decision of who will, arrive into Jannat and paradise, and who will have to spend some time maybe in Jahannam, burn his or her karma of past lives, plural lives, and who will be kind of relieved from their karma, and who will be forgiven their karma, if you will, and only Allah can do it, if you will. So let's see, Jana's chatting away. I've been told you're going to hell because you relayed prayers to Imam Hussein. Yeah, but not by a Shia, right? Because that's kind of more of a Wahhabi principle, I guess, or thought. Right? It was by a Quranist. Yeah, but the Quranists, they follow a guy called Rashad Khalifa. I don't know if you know this guy. So Rashad Khalifa is a guy who, he was a great mathematician. He was a great computer programmer back in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, exactly. Lol, LOL. Laughing out loud is the right thing to do. And essentially what he did was he translated his Quran, and he somehow related it to some numbers game that he found in the Quran, which had to do with the number 19 and how the number 19 protects the Quran and so on. And that was interesting in the sense that the numbers are true, and so there is a certain, there's a certain legitimacy to his mathematical argument, which I don't want to neither get too detailed in, but neither deny necessarily. But he also ended up kind of proclaiming himself as some kind of like the prophet of the covenant or something silly like this. And he gained his little followers. I think it was in Tucson, Arizona, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in the Southwest United States. And he ended up having affairs with yeah, it is pretty whack. Having affairs with you know, teenage girls and those kind of things. And oh, it's just really weird. It was just really weird what happened to that guy. And it was kind of a sad thing, because if he had just stayed kind of in his lane and just, you know, said, hey, I'm this, yeah, definitely they're culty. They're definitely culty guys. So you got to watch out for them, because they'll defend this whack guy who was, you know, having affairs with the teenage girls. And I'll be the last to say, you know, I'm the last one to be prudist, yeah, but you know, come on. I mean, you know, get married, have a lovely family, you know. But the problem with all these cult guys, and it's the same with, you know, guys like Fridtjof Schwan, if anyone is familiar with the works of Fridtjof Schwan, phenomenal Swiss philosopher, phenomenal. If you just read the old books of Fridtjof Schwan, you just get blown away by the guy, what he's writing. But if you look at the last maybe 10, 15 years of his life, he just got caught up in this occultist mindset and surrounding himself with, you know, women and all these crazy things that he did. I don't want to go too much into it, but that's why it's really important to stay away from all these yeah, yikes, definitely. That's why it's important to stay away from all these cultist people and just try to stay down to earth as much as possible. And I always say, try to find teachers who are down to earth. Like Imam Razvi was completely down to earth. He never let me kiss his hand. You know, the Middle Eastern way is to kind of kiss your hand like this, and he never allowed this. You know, he always just gave me a handshake, a firm handshake, looked me in the eye. You know, I would always bring tea when I came to visit him as like a little present, and he was always extremely irritated. And he said, "Don't bring tea next time. I don't want any presents," you know. And I brought tea anyway next time, and he still was, you know, mad at me. And so he was a really down-to-earth guy, you know, and you know, the best spiritual teachers are the ones who are just down to earth and not making a big show, because the problem is that people get caught up in this adoration, you know, adoring somehow a teacher, or adoring because people want to adore, because people have, for different issues, you know, people have daddy issues, or people have, you know, authority issues, or people have, you know, husband issues or things like that. And so, or wife issues. And so, you know, they're kind of looking for a figure to look up to. And it's whether it's the fascism, you know, politics, spirituality, whether it's the football team, just, you know, certain individuals tend to have a certain charisma that they gather others around them. And those others, you know, need to be really careful to not, you know, fall into that trap. So it's really important to say, okay, I like the teachings of this guy, I'll take that. But upon further analysis, you know, I don't like the teachings of that, and I don't. And so, you know, teaching should be a fully circular, you know, experience. That's why we try to teach in a very postmodern way here. That's why I like to take also your lessons and your teachings, because maybe I learn as much from you, or even more than you might learn from me. So that's why circular teaching kind of avoids this this kind of yeah, adoration or somehow occultation of certain individuals. Yeah. And yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. With the atheists, just look at how the atheists worship Mao Zedong, or worship Che Guevara, or everybody's in the West, is all the Westerners are running around with the Che Guevara shirts and all these things. So yeah, exactly. Richard Dawkins, another one. So many of these you know, figures are kind of aspired to, or somehow, exactly, celebrity cult, you know. So all this occultism is happening all the time, and it's important as a Muslim, you know, to remember La ilaha illallah, even with the ziyarat, okay, even with ziyarat, even with the prophets, even with the 12 imams, even, we are not saying that we don't worship them either, yeah? That's to close the circle on ziyarat also. So in a way, we're closing 3 circles at once now. We're closing the circle of education, we're closing the circle of occultism, we're closing the circle of adab, and we're closing the circle of ziyarat. So we've been graced now in this particular moment to close 4 circles at once, because neither do we go overboard with the ziyarat. So in other words, we don't believe that, let's say, if I go visit Imam Javad alayhi salam and I make dua, I'm making a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm asking Imam Javad, who is so much closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to help me transmit the message. But the message is still between me and my creator. It's still between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the message coming back is also between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I go and visit Imam Razvi and we have a conversation, even if I receive the barakat, I'm receiving it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not receiving it directly from Imam Razvi alayhi salam. Of course, he is bestowing it, but it's Allah who's bestowing it to him to bestow it to me, if that makes any sense. So there is a clear understanding that ziyarat is not worship of any human being, and it is simply a direct relationship between ourselves and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We feel okay to ask our friends to make dua for us. Why not Rasulullah or those who Allah loves? Ameen. I mean, this is exactly the point, yeah? Or even if you go and you ask your neighbor for a hammer or some salt or to help you, or you give some help to your neighbor, well, why? Just ask Allah, right? What's the point? Why should I go to my neighbor and ask for salt? Yeah? I asked for, when was it? 2 years ago, I was making some crepe and I asked my neighbor for salt. Okay, that was the last time I asked my neighbor for salt. Why? Why didn't I just say, Allah, you have the power, send the salt? Yeah? No, I didn't say, nor would I. But I asked Allah to help me, and I went and I knocked at my neighbor's door. So I still asked my neighbor. So tawassul, or somehow intercession, is a little bit like this. But you're asking the higher levels of spirits of those imams and prophets and awliyatullah, the saints of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who have passed before us. Alayhum assalam ajma'in. Okay, so I hope that we've closed the subject. If there are any more questions right now on ziyarat, which was just my little aside, then I'd be happy to answer them now or later, anytime that we feel like discussing it. So the good thing about this is that you guys get the video afterwards, and then after you get the video, you can still ask any questions you want. Okay, so anything now? Taking my prayers to Imam Hussein got me my job. Wow, congratulations on that. Mashallah, mashallah. I'm very happy for you. I'd be super interested to know what it is you're archiving, but anyway, that's for another day. So good for you, good for you. Yeah, I actually did with my lovely wife, we did tawassul to Imam Javad maybe 2 years ago when I was in Istanbul, and that was an unbelievable experience. I did a post about it. Maybe I'll just relink to that post in our chat, just so that all of you can follow up on that. And I just share my experience with tawassul with you, and happy to get your feedback on that. So it's quite radical what I write in there, but I guess you guys will be getting used to that anyway. So you might as well get dished with cold water. I think I'll put that in the chat. So yeah, anytime you all want, just feel free to ask any questions about ziyarat or tawassul or adab. Especially adab is really important, and I'll be happy to do my best to answer your questions, or just ask in the chat, and probably you'll get many different perspectives from our team Delta. Okay, so going back to, before we jump into Islam as Reason, we had some homework last time. We did examine the axioms, the 5 axioms of Imam Razvi. And it's not to say there were only 5, or it's not to say somehow we package this and limit it, but it just happened to be 5, really interesting points of his that he pointed out to me during our teaching. And I thought I would share it with you all. And so I saw some really good discussions, especially on the first 3 of the axioms. I wasn't sure if we really went into axioms 4 and 5 too deeply, but I just wanted to give anybody a chance who wanted to talk about it. If anybody wants to jump in and give a comment or a feedback, or, maybe ask a question, feel free to do that now. If nothing else, I would say, you can always come back to it. It's not going anywhere. So you can always, you know, even in later classes, you can go back. Oh yeah, what about Axiom 4? And what about this and that about the Hadith? And what about, you know, direct relationship, experiencing Islam on a daily basis and all those things? Always feel free to come back to that. So without further ado, why don't we jump into Islam is Reason? And let me see if I can share my screen with you. Let's try and see if this works.
I'm sorry, Ibrahim, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, please. Bismillah.
You referred to the 5 axioms of Imam Razvi, so I assume that they're somewhere written down in the chat or something, or I mean on Facebook, or where are they?
Yeah, so I shared them. We discussed them in the last video. That should be in the chat. Now, I'm not sure when we added you to Team Delta, so it may be that you didn't get the earlier messages. But depending when you got the messages, you may be able to scroll backwards. I never know with Messenger if you're able to scroll backwards and see your old messages or not. But if you're not, then I'll be happy to send you both the link to the last class video, and also we issued a syllabus for that class, and the axioms are also listed in that. So if you didn't get that material, probably because we added you late to the class, but I'll be happy to share that with you personally, and then you should be all caught up. And basically what we do is all these, like this video, and then the syllabus for that, and any material, any links or anything, we'll post it directly in the chat after the class. So I'm quite reliable about, you know, posting that stuff within 24 hours after the class, so that you can kind of follow up on it within the next month. So you have a month to kind of go through the material at your own time and your own pace, and kind of study it and go back to it, ask any questions, participate in the team exercises. So every class, there's a team exercise that usually ends up, you know, as a chat forum. We're in the Team Delta, so you can just kind of chat about certain aspects. And we try to have a kind of, as I told you, circular teaching. I don't know if you're familiar with Paulo Freire from Brazil, who taught Reconstructivist teaching, but it's this kind of circular teaching method. So you know, we try to you know, kind of encourage that here, and so everyone can share from their own experiences. So we ask kind of a question, and the teamwork is that everyone kind of circles around that question and tries to give as much color and experience to that question as we can. So that's how the class here works, by the way, Logan. So welcome aboard, and we hope to see you often. So yeah, someone posted it here. Let's see. Yeah, Rachel, great job. So here are the 5 axioms. Can you see the screen still, everyone? Can people see the axioms? Hello? Can someone speak?
I posted them in the chat, the meeting group chat.
Yeah, can everyone see the chat that Rachel posted? Hello?
Yes, we
can see it, right?
Yeah,
great. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you all. So yeah, so here's some of the, as I said, a few of the axioms. So Allah is a super ontological reality, and Islam is an experiential reality between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you. Okay, read the Quran as though it were Allah revealing it directly to you. Hadith are to be read through the lens of al-aql. Today we're going to talk about al-aql a lot. Al-aql means reason. Okay, so this is a really important axiom or principle for today. Is the principle of reason. It's a principle and an axiom. So if a hadith, for example, taking the corpus of hadith, which are the stories related about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and according to the Shia also about the 12 Imams alayhum assalam ajma'in, or for the Zaydis, any of the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhum assalam ajma'in. So if a hadith relates with aql, with reason, then you may use it. And if it doesn't relate with reason, then you should discard it. So no one is forcing you to, you know, kind of, no one is force feeding you BS, okay? And especially in today's day and age, there's no reason to be force fed BS and somehow accept it and think, okay, well, this is spiritual, so I have to bow down to it somehow. No, you don't. There's nothing spiritual about BS, okay? And if it is not logical, it does not come from God. That's really important to understand. Anything that is not logical does not come from God. Okay, so that's why we read the hadith through the lens of al-aql. We even read the Quran through the lens of al-aql. Why? Because when you read the Quran, there are many different interpretations of the Quran, whether it's a Wahhabi interpretation, whether it's a Maliki or Sunni interpretation, or a Shia Jafari interpretation, or a Zaydi interpretation, or a Mu'tazili interpretation. Mu'tazila were those who followed reason to the extreme of saying even the Prophet Muhammad and the family of the Prophet Muhammad should be judged through the lens of reason. Okay, alayhum assalam ajma'in. So that's the power of reason according to the Mu'tazila. And I actually have a very interesting book about Mu'tazilism. I don't know if you see I don't you see me now sharing this book here, but this book is a very interesting study called Defenders of Reason in Islam, Mu'tazilism from Medieval School to Modern School. And I'm very happy to discuss this book with you in a moment. It's just one book of many about reason in Islam. So again, this was a main principle or axiom. It's both a principle and an axiom of Imam Razvi. And it should be noted that Zaydi Islam, particularly, of all of the formal schools, the so-called madhahib of Islam, whether it's Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, Ismaili Shia, Jafari Shia, Zaydi Shia, Ibadi, Zahiri, Wahhabi, all the different schools of Islam through the centuries. Some schools have died out, some schools have come back or are seeing a revival, what have you. Of all the schools of Islam, it is the Zaydi school of Islam that has the closest relationship with reason, okay, with logic. And we'll get into why in a moment. Even though a lot of today's Zaydis, it has to be said, are following blindly. Unfortunately, here's a comment from Jana. Reason is good, nothing should be followed blindly. Exactly. So unfortunately, a lot of today's Zaydis are very, very much almost turning Zaydism into a Sunni school, just following blindly rather than asking and contrasting and challenging and all the things that Imam Zayd alayhi salam did do during his lifetime, which we'll look into in a moment. But so it's very important. Yeah, nothing should be followed blindly. Reason is good. Absolutely. So that's why reason is kind of checks and balances in many ways. Yeah. So when you see kind of occultist thinking, guys chasing a spiritual leader or, joining a cult group or these things, reason is what creates a certain distance also. Yeah. So when we do, for those who have worked in finance before, there's a thing called arm's length principle. Okay. Arm's length is the length of your arm. Why is it important? Because the length of your arm creates a space that no one can enter. Okay. Why is it important in finance? Because it avoids nepotism and it ensures that companies can deal with each other on what's called an arm's length basis, and business transactions can occur. I happen to work in the business world. Business transactions can occur in ways that ensure that there's less corruption. I want to say less corruption, close to zero corruption in a theoretical world, and no nepotism. So no somehow giving your brother and your cousin and your wife's uncle and your sister's husband and trying to give them great positions. You keep things at arm's length, okay? And in the same way, my encouragement to you is always keep your teachers somehow at an arm's length, even me. Keep your teachers at arm's length, because in that way you maintain your own individuality. At the same time, you maintain your own responsibility for your actions. So you don't come and say, Ibrahim Musa from the Zaydi school taught me this, so that's why I did it. No, you're going to follow your own actions and take responsibility for your own things. It's not going to be my fault. All right. So that's why I encourage everyone, keep arm's length to your teachers. Even if you love them, keep them at arm's length, because through arm's length, you can gain a certain space and also take a certain responsibility for your own learning curve, if you will. Okay. And that's reason is the way. I see some of that among 12ers sometimes, sadly. They sometimes think something needs to be followed just because the Imam said it. Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is, again, the test of what we criticize the strict Sunni Muslims for, the hadith, right? The corpus of hadith is usually what's criticized. The same test applied to the Shia books of hadith, okay? So whether it's Al-Kafi or any of the books of the hadith of the Shia, they have to go the same test, yeah? there's no following blindly just because we say we're Shia and we believe in Imam Hussein and Karbala and all that, and we get very emotional, but it doesn't mean that we take everything that is in those books blindly. And when you say great Shia teachers like Haidari, I don't know if you guys know Haidari, but he's a great guy. He's a very fun guy. I'll put a link to Haidari, I think, in the chat, just for fun. He's a 12-verse Shia, but he challenges a lot of the kind of typical classical Jafari assumptions. And he's really a very moderate 12-verse Shia in that sense. Yeah, you might know him if he's 12, or yeah, he's a very interesting guy. Let me see if I can find something about Seyyed Haidari. See if we can find him quickly. Yeah, this is the guy right here. And yeah, he's now living in Qom, but he's actually Iraqi guy. And he's a fun guy because he has this Arabic passionate way of discussing things. He's, very loud, but he's a fun guy too. He's very funny, but his logic is unbelievable. His level of logic is unbelievable. And this is a guy who yeah, here you can see it. This school is generally known for being critical of accepted or purportedly orthodox truths, and calls for a renewed examination of previously thought of unassailable texts or opinions within 12-er Shia school. And he has argued the 12-er Shia thought has by large evolved from a rational, theologically centered school to a jurisprudentially centered school, which is absolutely true. So this is a really interesting guy for you all to follow, especially for those who are somehow closer to 12-er Islam or Jafari Islam. Okay, so fortunately, we do have reason in Islam, and as I said, the Zaydi school is very close to reason in Islam. And what I want to do when we explore the issue of reason in Islam as such, why do we say Islam is reason? So the word or the term in Arabic for reason is al-aql. It's just the consciousness of reason, okay? And someone who is reasonable, we say al-aqil. That person is reasonable. He's aqil, or he's al-aqil, or she's aqil, aqila, or she's aqila, okay? So she's reasonable. She's a reasonable person. And she has this capacity of aql, okay? And when we look at the schools, and I'll explain to you why do Zaydi Shia have this traditional connection with reason, even though nowadays that's, for historical reasons that I'll explain in a moment, that's kind of fading away, unfortunately. But Imam Razvi tried to somehow keep the focus. But if we go into the Quran, here's our lovely Quran. And if we go into the Quran and we open and we actually read the Quran, especially if we read it with an Arabic dictionary, or we use one of these famous online concordance tools, like, for example, the corpusquran.com page, which is absolutely phenomenal page, very well researched page. It's what's called a concordance. It means that all of the terms located in the Quran are listed alphabetically, and you can go after them. Like, for example, aql. Let's take aql. So you can go to ayn. The root word is ayn, qaf, lam. So you can go into ayn, and then you go down and you go look for qaf. And then you see the lam, and there we go, aql, right there. And then you search it, and you can see that this word aql, which means reason, if you will, or there are different modular forms of the term that mean, in some way or other, they mean reason, okay? And you can see here it occurs 49 times in the Quran, okay? Typically as a verb form, to use reason or to apply reason or to be reasonable. So here you can see taqiluna, you use reason. Taqiluna, again, you use your intellect. Aqaluhu, so they understood it or understand or use their intellect, understand, intellect, reason, and so on. Will you reason? And so on and so forth. This one here happens to be one of my favorites. كَذَلِكَ يُبَيْنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ آيَاتِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. Okay, and what it means is, in this way, okay, in this manner, Allah opens up to you his ayat or his verses of the Quran so that you might use reason. So what it means is, if we don't apply reason, the converse way of looking at this ayat is logically converse, by the way. The logically converse way of looking at it, if we don't apply reason, the ayat of the Quran, the verses of the Quran, will not open up to you. Okay? They will remain closed to you on some level. So the key to open the ayat of the Quran is to use reason. Okay? And very few schools of Islam will tell you this today, but it says it right there. Yeah? So we're not making anything up here. Yeah? It literally says it right there. Okay? It's telling you. Yeah? And now you can try to find excuses historically why this ayat and what does this really mean and what is this, and all the schools are kind of trying to watch these things away. Yeah, it's the same thing with la ikraha fid din. There is no limitation to the ayat la ikraha fid din. La ikraha fid din means there is no limitation or somehow compulsion, or there is no obligation in religion. Okay, but what happens is that no matter what school of thought you speak with, they're all trying to somehow create some kind of compulsion within religion. Okay, force some kind of false identity upon the religion, and then subdue the Muslims into that form of religion. I'm sure all of you, especially the Westerners among you, have confronted this sometime, having converted to Islam and met people from wherever it is in the Muslim world, that everyone will try to kind of fish you and try to, reel you in to their kind of Islam, yeah? But la ikraha fi din means there is no compulsion. You can't force me to follow your Islam. I'll follow the Islam that I want to follow, yeah? Or I might not follow Islam at all, yeah? And it's completely my choice, yeah? And so they try to somehow put a limit on this, but there's no limit, yeah? And it's the same here. So there is no limit. So there's no limit to reason in this ayat. Okay? And that's why when Imam Razvi alayhi salam was asked, and I asked him this, what are the limits to reason in Islam? And he said, none. Okay, there are no limits to reason in Islam. And that's very important to understand, that this is a primary Zaydi thought. And it's not simply his thought, or it's not simply one generation or another. We'll go into a little bit why. But for those of you, I'll share this link later, because in our year 2 class, Usul al-Fiqh, this webpage, or these kind of concordances are going to help us a lot in deriving fatawa and ijtihad, in deriving judgments for complex postmodern situations in the crazy world that we live in. We need more sanity, and more sanity is brought by more sound and logical jurisprudence. And so we'll be using this principle a lot. Islam is reason is actually the umbrella for entire year 2 class. Yeah. So, and we'll be using this concordance a lot to look at root words in the Quran. What exactly do they mean? How are they used? So I'll be sure to link this. For those of you who don't know this page, maybe some of you have had a familiarity with this page already, or similar concordances online. I'll be happy to link this into the chat, and inshallah, we'll use this again and again, also in year 1, but particularly in year 2, inshallah. So this is, just one verse of the many in which al-aql is mentioned, but it's a beautiful verse saying, basically it's saying the key to the Quran, to the ayat in the Quran, is reason, okay? So, and you can, if you want to follow up on how this verb is used, or this root word is used throughout the Quran, you're welcome to go ahead and research all the 49 ways that this is used. There are other words that are not necessarily al-aql in terms of reason, but like, for example, wisdom. Wisdom is based on the root word ha, kaf, mim. and it can also mean judgment. It can also mean intellect. So we can look at the word ha, kaf, mim, hakim, or hukm, or al-hakim, Allahu al-hakim, yeah? The wise, or the benefactor of wisdom. Let's see if we find it here. And you can see a lot of, you know, the name of judgment, but it also means wisdom, establishment, arbitration. There it is, wisdom. Again, wisdom, and wisdom and judgment. So again, you know, you can see how many times now is used the term wisdom. Well, hikmata, in this case, hikmatun. Al-Hakim, the all-wise, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So wisdom, again, is such an important part of the Quran. Okay, so in this case, we have how many versions? Yeah, 210 times you see the root word for wisdom in its different declinations, wisdom and judgment in the Quran. Okay, so take away reason and wisdom from the Quran, and you have what is a very bare skeleton of the revelation. Okay, so this is just to show you how important wisdom and reason are in Islam. So we'll stick a little bit more with the term al-aql here, and what we'll see here is the Islamic view of reason as interpreted by Imam Razvi alayhi salam, that of the Zaydi Shia, exhibits a very high degree of correlation with the understanding of free, pure, and unadulterated intellectual reason as emerged, for example, but not only, as emerged from the European Enlightenment. And furthermore, a pure Islamic reason, as taught and practiced by Imam Razvi alayhi salam, also incorporates energetic, intuitive, and spiritual forms of reason, thus going far beyond Enlightenment's reason. So we say reason, we don't just say logic, okay? Many people think that if we say reason, we're somehow limiting it to logic. No, reason, at the end of the day, is anything that's reasonable. So if our spiritual intuition, or if the grace of God is somehow calling us to be closer to God, for example, by coming closer in our daily practice to Shariat, okay, emulating more and more the Shariat of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ every day, is typically the dalil zahiri, the outward proof of a higher station of Islam, is the outward following of Shariat. Okay, so when the batin, the inside of our souls, is closer aligned with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the revelation of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it will come naturally that we start to, in the outward form, closer and closer and closer follow the Shariat of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it doesn't mean that everyone that follows the Shariat has a high level of reason or aql or somehow wisdom or even barakat, even grace. But simply following the Shariat itself is a beautiful grace, because it keeps us from doing a lot of nonsense, yeah? Whether it's, you know, making money from interest rates, you know, whether it's having lots of side affairs from our marital relationship, whether it's, you know, not being truthful in our business dealings or whatever it is. It can be so many examples, but just sticking with the Shariat in a way is bringing us closer to reason and following reason to its final instance through intuition, through spirituality, which are higher levels of reason than simply intellectual thought, that will also bring us closer, more deeply inside the Shariat. So again, there's an interplay between the outer and the inner here, between al-zahir wal-batin. Okay, so al-zahir is the outward form and al-batin is the inward form. And the game between zahir and batin is that you can be batin on a very high level, but outwardly you're a mess. Okay, or outwardly you're following the Shariat and you're wearing the right clothes and your beard is extremely long, or somehow, you know, you've veiled your face or whatever it is, and you think you're somehow following the Shariat very closely, but you know, you don't really have this love or this closeness with Allah, with the Prophet Muhammad, with the Ahlul Bayt, with the Awliyatullah, and so all of this outward show, if you will, is not bringing you to a higher station of love or a higher station of unity with the Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it goes both ways. Yeah, the inner should be ideally a reflection of the outward, in the good, in the bad. Okay, so we try to make sure our zahir and our batin are both going on an upward level. I see some comments. Yeah, God is literally telling us to use intellect, yet so many Muslims don't. Exactly, that's the problem. Yeah, and Haider is a marja. Yeah, he is a marja, and he's a big marja. So the haram police, on outward appearance, most people would never guess that you're a Muslim. Yeah, I mean, me too. Yeah, but I'm not looking for that either. I'm not looking for some outward person to certify my faith. Yeah, I don't have that necessity. I never did. Nor do I want to be chasing someone else's interpretation of Islam, nor am I in the business of denying it. I mean, I have no problem if someone asks me, you know, are you Muslim? I say, I believe in the Prophet, I believe in Allah and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the quick answer, is just give shahadat, yeah? Whether I'm a Muslim or not, this is for Allah to decide. I don't really feel any necessity to prove anything to anyone. So, and I would suggest you all, on some level, it's up to you, but I would suggest that you don't take too much stock in what other people think, because that will always limit your development, you know, what other people think. So you kind of have to blow that up. And you know, those people who love you will follow you anyway, or stick with you anyway over the hard times. And those people who anyway were going to leave your life, they'll just kind of fall off and go into the background. And you have to find the people who are part of your destiny and leave behind the people who are part of your history. Okay, and that's in a large way, that has a lot to do with your own relationship with your spirituality, in this case, particularly with Islam. So, as I said, the main thing is to be Muslim, not whether other people think that you're Muslim. And the whole thing about being Muslim is submitting, because finally, you know, being Muslim is an adjective, really. It's not a noun. Yeah, it's not. If you look at the Arabic construction of the word Muslim, it's actually an adjective. Yeah, it's someone who submits, and the submission itself is the verb. So the description is qualifying the verb. So therefore, it's actually almost an adverb. And what you're doing is you're describing a person, or you're describing what they do or what their actions are. And that's why it's important that your actions are Islamic. Okay, and your non-actions are Islamic. And then does someone accept you as a Muslim or not is not your problem. Yeah. And even do you accept yourself as a Muslim is not your problem. Yeah. Only thing that matters is, are you taking the steps and the actions when they're necessary to be Muslim or to act in an Islamic manner, or are you avoiding those actions that could cause somehow you know, you to descend away from the path of submission to the Almighty. Yeah. So what we're talking about is submission to the Almighty and His will, and not the submission of some people who have put themselves in positions of authority to proclaim themselves to be great Muslims. Okay, so that's really important, and that's why reason, again, the whole arm's length principle, and that's why reason is so helpful. Pure, free, and unadulterated intellectual reason. Okay, and we go beyond enlightenment reason because we incorporate intuition, we incorporate energy, we incorporate spirituality. We'll be going a lot into that in our year 4 class, which is irfaniyat and tasawwuf, which basically mean the spiritual practices in Islam. So if we get through the usul ad-din, which is this year's class, which are the principles of Islam, and then we look at the jurisprudence of Islam, which is next year, and then year 3 will be the Islamic philosophy, and then year 4 will be very much, you know, intuitive practices and spiritual teachings that I hope, inshallah, to be able to give all of you, having made it to our year 4 class, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam. So the core element of the Quran is spoken word. Okay, we know it because it's the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the archangel Jibreel alayhi salam, through the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and finally to us. You've been takfired for holding certain views, and I don't even care. It's between you and God. Absolutely correct. Yeah, me too. I've got my takfirs, and I've got my latnat, which is curse upon you. So I'm proud. I wear them like a badge. Yeah, when I get my takfirs and my curse you and curse your family, and you are an unbeliever, you are a hypocrite, and these things. I like to wear them like a badge, yeah. So I've gotten quite a few of those, and I'm sure some of you have also, yeah. I just have fun with it. Yeah, actually, when I told the guy once, I told him I'm kafir. So if you want to have a discussion with me, you just have to know I'm a kafir. And then at the end, when we were finished, he said, "Are you kind of a Muslim?" And I said, "Yeah, I kind of am, yeah." But if I told you that from the beginning, you would have said, "You're not a Muslim." So so he finally got the point, and I think he learned something. Sometimes you have to teach people the other way. Anyways, so the core element of the Quran is the spoken word as revealed by Jibreel to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, verse by verse. So what does that mean for us? It means that as far as the book of the Quran is concerned, or the revelation is concerned, there are actually already up to 3 degrees of separation between the creator, al-Khaliq wal-Bari, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, and us, okay? So normally the degree of separation would be God and us, okay? So it'd be one degree of separation, okay? For the mystics, you know, the prophets and the imams and the awliyatullah, the friends of Allah that are close to Allah, you can say once there's a union, then there's no more degree of separation, okay, between the creator and the created. But that's a very high level of aspiration in Islam, okay? So for most of us, between ourselves and God, there's 1 degree of separation. But now you have 2 more degrees of separation. So you have Jibreel alayhi salam, who received the Quran, and he transmitted it, as we believe, perfectly to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who transmitted it as perfectly as he could unto us 1,400 years ago in the Arabic language, so that the people in the community of his time could understand it, not necessarily did understand it. And those who study the history of the ashab, of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, without a dogmatic limitation, they will realize that a lot of the Sahaba didn't really like Islam very much at the beginning, and didn't really like Islam after the Prophet left. And so even those who were able to receive the revelation didn't necessarily accept it, okay? And so it just shows you that between the Quran, the perfect understanding of the Quran, and ourselves in today's generations, are so many degrees of separation, okay? And that's why it's fundamental to read the Quran through the lens of al-aql and through the lens of reason. Because the only way to cover the gap, to bridge the gap, is through reason. So if you try to build a time machine and go back, you can't do it, okay? If you try to speak with today's scholars and ulama and the mullahs and so on, you'll find the vast majority to be extremely limited in their capacity for reason. I'm not calling them stupid. I'm just saying they're limited in their capacity for reason, okay? And you'll find yourselves in a situation where you'll actually have a larger degree of intellect than they do. So how is someone with a lower level of intellect going to clarify something for someone who has a higher level of intellect, okay? It's basically impossible. So therefore, you find that you've got to build your own channel and your own training and develop your own way of approaching the Quran. And that's why we look at the Quran, and the core element of the Quran is the spoken word. And just as a fun play of words here, the Greek word, the ancient Greek language for the word was logos, yeah? And that's where the term logic comes. So people think of logic as a very mathematical thing. But in fact, the ancient Greeks understood the word logic or logos to be a very language-based concept, okay? And language-based meaning interpretation, meaning hermeneutics, for those of you who are familiar with the philosophical term hermeneutics. We'll get much more into it in year 3. I'm going to give a whole a module on postmodern Islamic philosophy, and hermeneutics play a very large role. So in other words, the philosophy of language, yeah? But we cannot read the Quran and we cannot approach the Quran without a fundamental understanding of language, okay? And by that, not only do I mean the Arabic language, and I do mean the Arabic language, and so I highly encourage all of you, please, if you have any spare time apart from this class, try to take some Arabic language classes, try to learn the Quran in its own language, so that at the very least, you'll be able to go back into web pages like this one and find lovely words here in the Quran that would help you to learn more about Islam and broaden your teachings. We have another, yeah, what a mess Islamic early Islamic history was. No doubt, but there are also many great teachings from the early years. And we have to remember that if Islam was sent to the Prophet and continued by the Imams, alayhum assalam ajma'in, this is also a function of God's will. So the descent from the perfect Islam of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ into what we have today is a direct consequence of the early history of Islam. And that itself is a topic for another day. But just to bridge the gap to today, again, the way to bridge the gap, the way, in a sense, to be present today, present with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, is to engage in reason. And even you can practice this as a meditation. You can sit down in the evening before you go to bed, and you can say salawat and barakat on the Prophet Muhammad and his family, and just ask a question as it regards to the Quran. Ask for understanding, and you'll be surprised at the barakat and the grace of Allah that comes to you with time and broadens your understanding of the Quran and expands your capacity for reason and spirituality. This is a great meditation. I might actually do a separate video on this now that I think about it, for the Hawza in general, for everyone to learn this and practice it. Because again, we talked about Ziyarat and Tawassul, so we talked about approaching the prophets and the Imams. And this is a wonderful way to approach the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and gain a deeper understanding of the Quran than we might necessarily gain if you go to your local mosque and you ask, the guy who just came from Pakistan, or the guy who wears a very long beard and barely speaks your language. And we know how the experiences are as those who converted to Islam. And you had a question, you went to the mosque and you came more confused than when you entered, okay? So therefore, sometimes the only recourse, if you will, is to, go into yourself and trust the process of tasawwul and communication with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. It's very important to understand the Prophet is not dead, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Imams, alayhim assalam ajma'in, are not dead, okay? The only thing that's dead is their body. And this is a very deep subject that, we'll be getting into more in year 4 when it comes to Islamic spirituality. And I don't want to overdo it now and send you all in 20 different crazy directions. And it's not to be too much emphasized now, but just to point out that the access to the wisdom and the spirituality and the intellect of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and all the prophets and the Imams is still available. So that's the takeaway I want to give you for today's class, if any, is that the intellect of the prophets and the Imams, alayhum assalam ajma'in, is even today completely available. And it's up to you to channel it. So that's why we say logic is actually a language-based parameter. It's not necessarily in the first place a mathematical parameter, whereby many have said that mathematics is a language of truth. I happen to agree. I love mathematics. I find that mathematics provides the pure truth. It happens to be my path. Someone else might have had trouble in mathematics in grade school and they don't really like mathematics. That's okay. But there's a beauty in logic also, but in mathematical logic. But the term logos comes from language, actually. Yeah. And that's really important to understand. So when we look at the Quran, not only is the logos from the words of the Quran, the logos is the Quran, okay? The language itself is the logos. It's the logic, okay? So it's very important to understand that this goes in both directions. Yeah, the logic that was the basis of ancient Greek philosophy then later was adapted and developed by the peripatetic Islamic philosophers during the Golden Age of Islam. And during the European Renaissance, Islamic philosophy was in large part appropriated by European culture and later bloomed into full reason, if you will, as a consequence of the Enlightenment period. So later on, we'll study about Islamist philosophy and we'll talk a lot about the influence of Islamic philosophy on the Enlightenment period, okay? So what's really interesting to understand about the development of reason within Islam is that in the study circles of Imam Zayd alayhi salam, who is of course the eponymous founder of the Zaydi school of Islam, okay? He was in the 5th generation after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was the child of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, Ali ibn Hussein, and his lovely wife Jodha from Sindh, which was a region in what is today Pakistan, what you would say is Greater India at the time, and should I say, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, his lovely wife was the Persian princess Sharpanu. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin was half Persian, half Arabic, and Imam Zayd was half Indian, 1/4 Persian, 1/4 Arabic. So you see that when we go down the chain of imams in their different directions, quite early in the genealogy of the imams, there are mixed races, if you will, or mixed cultures and intercultural families being created. And so this idea that somehow all of the Islamic history is limited to the Arabs, yeah, is not actually in any way accurate, particularly not in Shia Islam, okay? So that's a little aside that multiculturalism or interculturalism was a very early part of the spiritual Islamic process. And influences from both Persia and Greater India flooded early Islam, okay? And when we look at the study circle of Imam Zayd and his older brother, Imam Baqir alayhi salam, and the founder of Mu'tazilism, who is Wasil ibn Ata, I say alayhi salam on him, he was the first so-called Mu'tazila. Why? Because he left the circle of Hassan of Basra at the time, who was one of the early Sufis, because they disagreed on the role of reason or the principle of reason. And after he had left, there was a saying like Wasil at Tazala, which meant something like he left us, or he broke away from our group. And that's why the Mu'tazila are those who broke away from this kind of very traditionalist, rigid limitations on Islam and Sufism and went to expand the concept of reason within Islam. The later circles of Mu'tazila, as we mentioned before, they even said that there are no limits to reason. Even we look at the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and we apply the lens of reason. Even we look at the Imams and we apply the lens of reason. Even we look at the Quran and we apply the lens of reason. What is the position of Shia Islam to that, particularly Zaydi Islam? Yes, that is all true, but we still reason, actually. Reason is what brings us to have a great reverence for the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim assalam ajma'in and the Awliyatullah qad as-sirat alayh. And therefore, we don't look at our reason as being outside or somehow superior to the prophets and the angels and the imams and the friends of Allah, the awliyatullah. but we hold them in the highest of reverence, okay? So holding this, you know, circle of people, spiritual bodies, if you will, to be on a higher level is a reverence that comes from reason. It is not opposed to reason, okay? This comes from a very deep thought, and it's a very subtle difference between the reason of the Mu'tazila and the reason of the Zaydis. And also to a certain extent of the other Shia groups, whereby, as we discussed earlier today, some of the Shia groups have now become very jurisprudential in their character and have left a little bit the way of reason and have left a little bit the way of true theological thought, which is always present and is always renewing and reviving itself. So there are some comments here. You married the bane of your existence, and you married someone who does math for fun. I was kind of like that too when I was younger. So yeah. So Persian nationalists love to claim Islam is an Arab religion that was forced on them. That's not really true. As we know, there's plenty of Persian influence, exactly, particularly Shia Islam, yeah? And that's why the Sunni Arabs, when they like to disqualify the Shia, they call them Majusi, okay? Because Majusi were the so-called, the Zoroastrians, who were Iranians before the Muslims came and conquered Iran, and the Arabs called them, in a somewhat disrespecting manner, called them Majusi. So that's why when the Sunni Arabs talk about the Iranians or talk about the Shia, they call them Majusi, okay? And that's why, well, obviously, that's because they completely missed the point, which is that reason and intercultural influence have been with Shia Islam from the very beginning, thus debunking all those silly claims, yeah? So, but we see this circle of kind of intellectuals in this very early generation of Islam, which were Imam Zayd, Imam Baqir, Wasl ibn Ata, later Imam Ja'far, who was the child of Imam Baqir, and of course, therefore the nephew of Imam Zayd, alayhim assalam ajma'in. And of course, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq is the grounder of the eponymous grounder of the Ja'fari school of Islam, which today are called the Twelvers, or somehow referred to the 12 Imams as their guiding light. So all of their students, and so the first jurisprudential and philosophical treatise came from this book. So the first book about fiqh or jurisprudence in Islam came from Imam Zayd, okay, alayhi salam. The first book of hadith came from Imam Zayd, alayhi salam, okay? So he was the one who actually was the first to compile these jurisprudential and hagiographical works, and very rarely gets the credit for that. So neither the Sunni schools nor the Shia Ja'fari schools typically give Imam Zayd the credit for this. But if you look historically, it is actually true, yeah? So the students of this great circle of intellectuals of that generation, the fourth and fifth generations after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they went on to ground the Zaydi, Ja'fari, Ismaili Shia schools. Hanafi Islam was grounded by Imam Abu Hanifa, who was a great follower of Imam Zayd and Imam Ja'far alayhum assalam ajma'in, and in fact was a supporter of the Shia, which is why it's so mind-boggling that the Sunnis claim Imam Abu Hanifa. Actually, the Shia should be claiming Imam Abu Hanifa, but that's a different story, which we'll get into later. But what we see also, unfortunately, is that with every declination of the schools, reason and logic tend to kind of drip away, until we have the situation that we have today, which is that most schools teach Islam in a very dogmatic and a very top-down manner, okay? Whereas the circles, why do I say the circles, the study circle of Zayd, Baqir, Wasil, Ja'far, Abu Hanifa, alayhum assalam ajma'in. Why do we say the circle? Because it was a circular teaching, okay? It was a reconstructivist teaching of its time, even though reconstructivism is a term we use now to describe certain educational or pedagogical methodologies, such as that of Paulo Freire, who we talked about before today. But this kind of circular teaching is in fact the basis of the Hawza, okay? So fortunately, Shia Islam Yeah, even my little baby here, he has something to say about that. You're right, baby, you're right. Even my 4-month baby has a few words to say about that. So this whole circle of circular kind of teaching is the basis of the Hawza, and that's a beautiful methodology that's been preserved in Shia Islam. If you've had the pleasure of going to a 12-hour Hawza, you'll find this kind of methodology. You'll have a guy like me who basically is teaching the class, but nonetheless, students are making comments, responding. There's definitely a dialogue going on. Or later in the chat, what we had last month, and we'll have it again hopefully every month, is that all of you actively go into the discussion, and everyone is kind of teaching the other in a way, so that this whole teaching becomes circular and is not simply top down. But now, unfortunately, a lot of the teachings have become top down, particularly in Sunni Islam, and this is a loss in Islam. And that's why we're lucky to have the concept of the Hawza in Shia Islam, and I feel privileged to be able to develop that with all of you. Some comments here. But they're Arabic Shia, ironic to call them that. A bit of an unorthodox 12-hour, I suppose, since I don't just blindly follow something because of Marjo or even Imam said it. Exactly, yeah. It's good to be unorthodox in that sense, because well, truth is always unorthodox, okay? The challenge of truth is its level of unorthodoxy, in a way, yeah? There are some truths which are orthodox, but not always in the way that the orthodox loving people are interpreting them, okay? So is Allah the creator? Yes, he is. But what does that mean? So you can go deeper and deeper and deeper into that, and you can think about that. Or does Islam mean submission? Yes, it does. We just talked about it. But what is submission? Okay? And we go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into that. So even the orthodox truths can be approached in an unorthodox manner or methodology. And the way of truth is to find the unorthodox methods and approach truth in an unorthodox manner, even the orthodox truths, even when we accept the orthodox truths. I like to give the example, for those of you who like classical music, classical Western music, of Maurice Ravel, who was a great French pianist and composer. And when he was studying at the conservatory in Paris, when he was a student, the teachers would go crazy with him, because they would give him questions on harmony, on musical harmony, for those who know a little bit about music, counterpoint and harmony. And he would answer the questions in a completely unorthodox manner, but still following the rules of harmony, like the circle of fifths and counterpoint rules and those kind of things. And so they tried to throw him out, actually, and they couldn't throw him out. And he went on to win a lot of prizes, and he went on to become Maurice Ravel, who was the great French composer. And if you listen to his music, it's completely unorthodox in the way it develops, both melodically, harmonically, rhythmically. But when you study it deeper, it completely follows all of the laws of harmony and the circle of fifths. So it's not like the later dissonant music where everyone tried to become communist and write the same number of notes on the musical chart and so on. These silly things that sound terrible. But it's perfectly harmonic music. It's just completely out there, yeah? Very surreal and very magical, if you will. So the way to approach, I take that as an example for those who might relate, because the idea to approach truth is to approach orthodox truth in an unorthodox manner, and therefore look at a thing from many different angles. I believe in Allah and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's the shahada. But what exactly is belief, and what exactly is Allah, and what is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So even looking at the shahada, you can look at it from so many different angles, and this is how you polish your truth, even orthodox truths, by looking at these things from many different angles. There's a comment in the chat, but music is haram, yeah. Yep, we're all kafirun here. So yeah, as I always say, music is the foundation of the universe. If you look at how the planets are rotating around the sun. There's a rhythm and a melody and a harmony. If you look at the eclipses, or if you look at, you know, the sound of the wind through the leaves, or the birds chirping in your garden, this is all music, you know, and all of this music is coming directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So music is the foundation of our existence. That's a very deep scientific thing. It's not so much a theological thing. It's more of a scientific truth that the basis of matter is vibration, and the fundamental music is the fundamental vibration. Okay, that's a very deep scientific truth, much more than it is a theological truth. But it also expresses itself through, for example, the sound of a good reader of the Quran, reading the Quran and bringing your spirit to a higher level of experience. Okay, so music is unavoidable, apart from the fact that it's when is music haram? Music is then haram when human beings use it to foster evil intentions, okay, or foster intentions that lead away from the path of Islam. For example, when Lady Gaga is whipping lots of tied up men in her video, that's haram, okay? When Rihanna is singing S&M and she's whipping a lot of guys in her video, that's haram, okay? Those kind of music are haram. The kind of music like classical music that opens our soul and our spirit, the kind of music that, like, for example, the nasheeds or the qasidas that praise the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, praise Imam Ali alayhi salam, these are all, my little baby, he's completely in agreement with me. That's nice to see. These are all, that's a form of music too. When your baby is speaking with you, that's the most beautiful music. So all of these kinds of music are halal, and not only halal, but they're mustahab. I mean, it's to be encouraged, you know, it's to be encouraged to listen to a beautiful nasheed, to listen to a beautiful qasida, for example, from Yusuf Islam, for those of you who are familiar with his music. This should be encouraged and, in fact, propagated. And we have to teach the Muslims, again, what Islam is. This is very important because a lot of them don't know. So atonal music is definitely haram. Exactly. All this communist Schoenberg and all these guys are definitely haram. I like Sufi music. It's so good. Yeah, a lot of Sufi music is very good. I agree with you. Most of it. Exactly. And Sufism, why music and Sufism? Because it opens up the heart and it opens a higher level of intuition. Okay. If you were visiting my yoga classes, I could talk a lot more about this in a more relaxed way. But unfortunately, the language of Islam is somewhat limiting because we have to take everyone with us. But as I like to say, today's Muslims understand the Shariat, but not the spirituality. Today's yogis understand spirituality, but not the Shariat. So the point is to understand both. Understand the law, follow the law, but at the same time, open yourself for higher levels of experience and intuition, inshallah. In this case, through reason. And if we look at the logos of the Quran leading to the logos of language and reason, then we can say or consider that the Quran itself contains a kind of hermeneutic philosophy, as though Allah wanted to challenge humankind to renew and reinterpret the Quran anew for any time and any context. So this is why it's important to approach the Quran in your generation, in your time, because through reason, we have this key that we can open the Quran and experience it in our own particular way for our own particular lives, okay? That's why I ask provocative questions from time to time in the chat, just to make sure that you're applying the Quran to yourselves and learning yourselves how to approach the Quran and find your own definitions and your own logos and your own philosophy, inshallah. Because Allah is revealing the Quran finally directly to you, as we discussed in the axiom, yeah? So Allah spoke to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu to the Archangel Jibreel alayhi salam, and he revealed all the external and internal truths. Let me go pick up my baby and see if he wants to hang out with us. 1 second. Come here, baby. Come here. Come to us. 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 Let's start with our friends. Come here. Here's my little, my youngest student. Hello. It's like, hello. Hello. Assalamu alaikum. This is the youngest student of the Hawza, little Seyyed Mehdi Kurosh. So he's very interested about our interpretation of reason. So let's continue. Let's see if Kurosh agrees. No, do you agree? Do you agree? Muwafaqi, Jana? Muwafaqi, Jana? He's not sure yet. He's thinking about it. He's thinking about it. So when Allah revealed all the external and internal truths as individual recitations, which were then annotated in the form of the Quran. So, of course, given the highly subjective and intangible nature of language itself, there emerges a natural requirement for human interpretation. And so Islamic scholars have been studying language interpretation in the form of ta'lim, tafsir, and ta'wil for centuries, okay? So get closer to these terms. What I want to give you as a homework for next time, please, I want to give you two homeworks. One is try to find an example of reason in Islam, okay? These are both group works, so you can share them in the chat, please. So try to find an example of reason in Islam, and also please study a little bit the terms of ta'lim and tafsir and ta'wil. I will put the definitions in the chat and ask you all please to follow up on them, and we'll have a little discussion about ta'lim and tafsir. But for the first 2 weeks, let's try to focus on an example, any example in your daily lives or in Islam, in the Quran, or in the history of Islam, what you've seen as an example of reason in Islam, inshallah. So what Imam Razvi used to say is that reason leads to humanism. You remember our first principle was Islam is humanism or humanitarianism. And what is inhumane can never be considered reasonable. Yeah, because there's also a kind of a cold reason, which turns everything into a kind of machine logic and acts to divide human beings through the razor-sharp edge of the intellect. But the kind of reason we're talking about is the warm kind of reason. In terms of the temperature scale, the warm kind of reason which leads to unity between human beings, love, care, consideration, humanitarianism, and unity in Islam, but also with all the religions, all of the world's philosophies. And that's why Imam Razvi said, and it's very nice in German, was nicht vernünftig ist, ist auch nicht menschlich. So what is not reasonable is also not human or humane. And what I like to say is, what is not reasonable does not come from God. Okay? So again, we find this last ayat that I already read to you a couple of times. كَذَلِكَ يُبَيْنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ آيَاتِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. And thus does Allah reveal to you His signs so that you may apply reason, inshallah. And I'll follow up on the last comments here in the chat and also give you some... You've got your cat on your lap. That's kind of like a baby. That's kind of like a baby. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you like our little baby. Thank you so much. So yeah, so if you have any more questions, you're welcome to ask now. So again, the homework, I hope it's clear. Let's say the first 2 weeks, let's focus on reason in Islam, and everyone bring an example and let's discuss those examples. And then I'd like to go into the terms ta'lim, tafsir, and ta'wil and explain those to you a little bit and go into those. So any more questions? Not now. Do you have any questions? No questions. Okay. So everyone, so Logan, yeah, you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
I've lost track a little bit of some questions I had, but one thing that I thought.
By the way, just to interrupt before you start, you can also ask them in the chat. You know, it's not like you have to ask. If anything comes back to you, like, oh yeah, I remember I wanted to ask something, just ask it in the chat. There's no problem. Yeah.
You mean on Messenger?
Yeah, on Messenger in the Delta team, exactly.
Later. Yeah. I mean, this was very beautiful. Thank you. And I really liked the distinction you made at the beginning between like European Enlightenment reason and what's meant by intellect in Islam, because it's very easy in the West to like do a direct translation you know, and not understand that they're different. I mean, Western logic is a lot more material, and aql is something very sacred.
Absolutely,
you know?
that's a beautiful way to say it. That's a very beautiful way to say it. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I appreciate that, and I thought it was interesting the reference you made briefly to like the last judgment and multiple incarnations being judged at the end of time. If I got that correct, is that right? Like, because
that was a little wink that I gave you guys. That's something for year 4. But let's say that, look, I mean, anyway, in the Quran, it mentions 5 different phases of life. So it mentions the zygote, right? So when the sperm and the mother cell come together in the egg, that's the first form of consciousness, okay, of the human being. The second form of conscious is alaq. So right? So when you have the embryo, okay, the next stage of life is what we call the dunya, or this life. This is our consciousness now as we're experiencing it. After we die, we go into a kind of a temporary space of, if you will, purgatory is not really the right word, but somehow a place of an in-between or intermediate phase. Hello. And we go into what's called barzakh. And then after barzakh is when we go to our final stage of consciousness, which is either called Jahannam, which is hell, or Jannat, which is obviously heaven, right? And so those are our kind of final landing places, if you will. And so I kind of said it with a wink in my eye, like, we've had levels of consciousness before, we just haven't necessarily been able to expound on them in the way that we're able to in this dunya. And that's why this dunya is called the land of trial, okay? Or the experience of trial, because this is the trial period where, you know, either we're living close to the Shariat and we're following the path of Allah and we're getting closer to higher level of consciousness, or we're not. Yeah, we're wasting our lives drowning in materialism and somehow despair and hopelessness. Yeah, so we have the choice. Yeah, but it's our choice. Yeah, and so that's kind of where I was kind of winking at with that comment, if that's what your question was.
Yeah, just a little bit more on that. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else for now? All right. If nothing else, I'd like to ask you to open your hands and let's say Fatiha together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim, siratal ladzina an'amta alayhim. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for a lovely class. I hope you enjoyed it. And I mean, exactly, Rachel. I mean, and we hope to, of course, have nice chats. So again, I'll put the video and the material that we discussed, the Quran, the Corpus Quran page in the chat, and also again, repeat the homework that we have. And yeah, thank you to Rachel for a lovely Hawza, and everyone else. Thank you so much. And let's have nice chats this month. And I look forward to see you next month, inshallah, in our year 1 Hawza class 3. Islam is Menschlichkeit, Islam is Vernunft, Islam is Freiheit, Islam is freedom. So the next one is Islam is freedom. So I certainly hope you'll all be there for that one. And have a great month, and we'll be in touch, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.